a workbook, these are images 120, 123, and 125. Now remember, or hopefully you've observed, that the images are placed in this order because they are chronological. So these three artists are post-impressionist artists. The last artist in this group, 125, Paul Cézanne, is actually the leader of this group, but the particular painting that was selected for the 250 happened to be painted later than 120 and 123. So what are the post-impressionists? Before spring break, we talked about Impressionism, which is really the impression of a moment of light and time. So post, we know, is after the Impressionist. So hopefully you can understand that there's definitely an influence from the Impressionist on these group of artists. It's also a predominantly French art movement. We've been seeing most of those recently. It developed roughly between 1886 and 1905. So again, a really short art movement, short period of time. And it lasted really between the final Impressionist exhibition at the Salon to the birth of Fauvism, which is another French movement that we'll look at later this week. All of these are really about color, but very specifically, that's how they're kind of divided into their isms. So post-impressionism emerged really as a reaction to, or maybe even kind of against, the impressionist concern for naturalistic depiction of light and color. So they were trying to capture what was truly happening when your light perceived how the sun or the moon or the stars actually hit or impacted a surface. And so post-impressionists are going a step further. They're saying, well, why can't I manipulate this? Why can't I play around with this idea of color? Why can't I be more expressive? So due to its broad emphasis on abstract qualities, so post-impressionism starts to become much more abstract, which I know a lot of you are looking forward to. And there's really some symbolic content. Post-impressionism encompasses, it's kind of an umbrella to some other isms. So these artists that we're going to look at actually all have their own ism within this post-impressionism. The first artist, Seurat, is the inventor and nearly exclusive to being the only artist in Pointillism. Symbolism, which actually Van Gogh is a symbolist, and then primitivism, a guy who I don't happen to be fond of, and you're welcome to love him and his art, but he was a primitivist. Even though all three of these are different, they all fall under that umbrella of post-impressionism. Okay, so again, post-impressionism-ish, 1880s through early 1900s, we really only have less than a handful of artists that are true French post-impressionists. Van Gogh, Gauguin, Paul Cézanne, and Georges Seurat. Here's a map. Basically, we're looking towards France because this is, again, a French movement. So what exactly is post-impressionism? It really refers to this artistic style that, follows the impressionist. Most of the post-impressionists truly did begin as impressionists. This was revolutionary. They looked up to this very small group of artists. It was a really close social class of these working artists. They had great influence on each other. They all wrote down their ideas and their beliefs, and they would meet and they would socialize and they would congregate and they would talk about all of these ideas. And to me, as I kind of picture that time period, it's almost very romantic, all of these big ideas and all focused on, almost for the first time in history, of creating art for art's sake. So Georges Seurat was a post-impressionist because he really did not paint like anyone before him, and he invented this style called Pointillism. Van Gogh, he wanted to add a lot more emotion into his work, while Seurat and Cézanne were really went about construction and deconstruction of their ideas almost scientifically and really prescribed. Van Gogh was all about emotion, and that's why his art is his art. So we'll get more to that when we get to his work. However, they did continue the bright, bold colors of the Impressionists and their very expressive use in their brushstroke, as well as painting outdoors. This is a word that we need to recognize, avant-garde. Hopefully you've heard of it. I know several of you have probably heard of it in terms or context of fashion, but avant-garde truly means like the front guard. So if you think about an army, they are the kind of group that's in the very front of the entire army. They are the first guard. They're the first people that are going to go in and knock it out. And so avant-garde stems from the idea of a military group, but it has turned into and bridged into being new guard. And so you're like a new wave. They're new ideas. So things that are avant-garde now are really groundbreaking and sometimes pushing the limits. The post-impressionists, like the impressionists, were also influenced by Japanese art, Japanese prints. We see a move more towards abstraction and an even greater emphasis on color and texture. So some vocabulary, you certainly don't have to memorize this whatsoever, but with Seurat, we really want to associate Pointillism. Van Gogh, lots of the elements and principles. But when you look at his work, it's really foundational for community. He was a lonely man, had kind of a sad life story. I wish we had time in class that we could talk about him in depth. I encourage you to look more into him and his story and his art. There are tons of awesome documentaries and even some, fictional based on the life of Van Gogh. Beautiful movies and stories and that have been made about him. So go for it. It's really interesting. We do have a lot of time right now. And Cezanne, color, value, space, emphasis, overlap. And Cezanne is, like I mentioned earlier, really considered to be the father of the post-impressionists. He's the leader. So I'm going to break this down into the 3 artists that are included in the 250, and George Seurat is not, but I have to talk about him. He is a must-know. There are some beautiful pointillist paintings that the Indianapolis Museum of Art actually owns, and so if you have been or ever get the chance to go, this is one of my very favorite places to go visit, because you can stand in front of these pointillists and you're able to just completely immerse yourself in these dots. And so I want you to understand what pointillism really is. If you hear those little grunts, those are my puppies. Hi, honey girl. Okay, George Seurat was a French painter who founded this new style called Pointillism. He began painting in this style of Impressionism, so he was trained, basically influenced by the Impressionists, but he really became more interested in the science of color. And so if you can think about what's happening with light and color and photography and all of the influence of these things in fine art in Paris and France at the time, this is pretty cool. He's really famous for using little dabs of pure color to basically paint with. And then when you view his paintings from a distance, your eye does this awesome thing, and it does it every single day when we look at the TV or when you look at a photocopy of something. It actually mixes all the tiny dots together and it's called optical mixing, and then boom, it's like magic. You actually see the entire painting as a whole. So let's break that down a little bit. Hopefully you are familiar with this. Maybe some of you have seen this in person. I know a lot of you have been to the Chicago Art Institute. This is one of their big attractions. I've seen it many times. It's huge. It's got this beautiful space. It's usually a crowded room. It's really neat because when you walk into the space and you are 40, 30, 20, and 10 feet away from it, it just looks like this beautiful kind of fuzzy landscape. And then as you take a step by step closer, you are able to finally see these little hazy dots, pure dots of color. And so this is Seurat's most famous. Again, this is Pointillism, so let's break that down. It's a technique of painting with little points or little dots of color. And what Seurat is doing is he's not making those secondary or those tertiary colors on his palette. He's not taking yellow and red and mixing them together to create orange. He's laying down yellow dots next to red dots, and then your eye actually visually mixes them together to create that secondary color, like orange or green or purple. So as you can see, hopefully on this, and it's fuzzy because it's meant to be fuzzy, we've got all of these little dots of color. Sorry, my dog's pushing my hand. Okay, so how does this work? How do the colors mix? When two colors are right next to each other, your eye truly does mix them together. This process is very simply called optical mixing. So using optical mixing, which Seurat knew about, the actual science of this, instead of physically mixing his paint, he's using dots of pure color, which actually makes for a brighter color. It's genius. It's awesome. So by using primary colors, so red, yellow, and blue, and then laying them next to other colors, you're able to create basically the Roy G. Biv, the entire scale or the entire span of the rainbow visually. And so hopefully you remember this. I used to teach elementary school, and it was like magic to teach the primary colors and then mixing them together to create your secondary colors. But primary colors, which you literally cannot make, are red, blue, and yellow. Not in light, but actually in pigment. Your secondary colors are those mixed between those, or so your purple, orange, and your green. And then you can go on and on and on with your color wheel and mix your secondary colors together, or your primary and a secondary, to create a third, which is called a tertiary, and it can be limitless. So take a second to actually look at this. It's pretty cool. All of these dots. This is crazy, and I hope you can understand this, but this is kind of an example of what your brain and your eyes do. If you stare at this image for about 10 to 20 seconds, and then either close your eyes or you can look away at like a blank surface, you should truly be able to see the traditional American flag with red, white, and blue. And so your brain and your eyes, which are in the same, they work together with that optical nerve, creates this really cool color mixing. Look up successive contrast if you're ever interested. There's some interesting articles about it and lots more examples. Okay, so back to Seurat's most famous painting, a Sunday afternoon in the park on the island of Le Grand Jatte. So basically he went over a very long period of time, and he studied this kind of park next to a body of water. And so in contrast to what the Impressionists and what Van Gogh were doing, he really did this as kind of a figure study, and he would work on this for years and years and years. So this does not happen quickly. This is a huge painting, most commonly referred to as Sunday in the Park. It's been in a lot of kind of cartoons. My favorite, it's in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, because that movie was shot in Chicago, and when they skipped school, they actually went, and there's a little piece in the movie in front of this painting. But the dots, approximately, look at that, 3,456,000. No, they probably haven't actually been painted because many of them overlap. But if you think about it, you take 2-inch square by 2-inch square and count how many dots there are, and then multiply it, and then you get that number. Honey, stop. Here are some more Seurat examples. He had a really small body of work because he took so long to actually paint these. And all landscapes. Again, that influence of the sun on the landscape and what is happening to create these colors. Okay, our next artist is Vincent van Gogh. So I'm going to stop the first video here, and we'll pick up with Van Gogh for our second video.